Surrounded by guards from a long-forgotten era, this poor guy found himself on the verge of death. In his hand he held a piece of high-tech gear that had terrified the entire population. A simple lighter, but it was because of that very lighter that Oda Gentoku managed to make it out alive. For many people, happiness means getting married, having kids, and settling down. Our protagonist didn't deny that having a wife and kids was one form of happiness, but to him, living free and single was a whole different kind of joy. And with that thought, he wraps up another day's work. This is Oda Gentoku, a 38-year-old city handyman. That day he'd been called to an elderly couple's place. The problem was simple. Someone had just shut off the main water valve, but he went ahead and swapped out the faucet and the filter while he was at it. Despite being a jack of all trades, his true specialty was electrical work. That's when the old man calls him over to ask when he's finally going to get married. Gentoku already knew exactly where this conversation was heading. He brushes it off, saying that these days, just keeping yourself alive is hard enough. Plus, he had the perfect excuse. His father's dying wish was for him to never get married. The old man thought that was absurd, insisting that true happiness could only be found in marriage and children, but Gentoku wasn't buying it. Thanking them for the work, he hopped on his bike and took off. With the last job of the day done, he could finally unwind and crack open a cold beer. After a long swig, he shouts to himself that being single is the best thing in the world. After all, nobody nagged him about his clothes, and he could spend his time and money exactly how he pleased. Between camping and fishing, his hobbies kept him plenty busy, and he made more than enough to fund his lifestyle. That's when an incense burner reminds him of something important: the anniversary of his father's death. Thinking about it brought back memories of just how much that old man had suffered throughout his life. His mother was a compulsive spender, and every cent his father earned would vanish in the blink of an eye. When his father tried to grow the business and took out a loan for new equipment, his mother simply vanished with all the cash, leaving him completely broken. But it was his grandfather who stepped in to save them. He used every penny of his savings to clear the debt, moved into their house, and started helping out with the work. Even though it was an electrical company, his grandfather transformed it into a handyman shop. Seeing his father and grandfather working side by side made young Gentoku want to follow in their footsteps, and that's how he was inspired to carry on the legacy of Oda Electric Works. Living with his grandfather brought the life back into his father. On the weekends, the three of them would go fishing and camping, making new happy memories. His father was a huge motorcycle fan, and his grandfather used to ride a lot in his younger days too. They spent all their time buying and fixing up bikes together. Sometimes the three of them would go out for a ride, and for Gentoku, those were the best days of his life. That was the era when his love for the free life truly began to take root. His father always advised him not to fall for the nonsense that marriage was the only way to be happy. To him, as long as Gentoku was happy, that was all that mattered. He'd say that all that talk about getting married or giving parents grandchildren was total nonsense, and that he should just live his life however he wanted. Back in the present, those words from his father, who had suffered so much because of a marriage, had sealed Gentoku's fate. Sure, he liked women, but the idea of a happily married life didn't interest him in the slightest. He'd much rather spend his time riding his bike, camping and fishing, or just chilling with manga and light novels. With work winding down at the end of the month, he decides to plan a 3-day, 2-night getaway, maybe to a hot spring inn somewhere. His mind had been made up for a long time. He would stay single, earn his own money, and spend it however he damn well pleased. The next day at a factory, a young man was apologizing to Gentoku, saying his metal door had suddenly broken, but the handyman calms him down, saying he's pretty sure he can fix it with the spare parts he brought along. He then gives them a heads up that the power will be out for a bit. With their permission, Gentoku flips the circuit breaker and hangs a warning sign on the door, but without anyone noticing, the sign peels off and falls to the floor. While he worked, his mind was already on his trip, planning out which tourist spots to hit along the way. That's when, out of nowhere, he takes a massive electric shock. He's thrown backward, and as he falls, he wonders who the hell turned the power back on, because he was certain he'd killed the breaker. Slumped on the floor, he couldn't believe it. Right in the middle of a job, he'd been electrocuted, and just like that, he was dead. But something felt off. He wasn't dead. Suddenly, he pushes himself up, realizing that somehow, he was still breathing. Even though it hurt like a total bitch, his body seemed fine. But more importantly, he wasn't in the factory anymore. Now he was standing in a place with some seriously bizarre architecture. Gentoku wondered if he'd somehow ended up in some kind of warehouse district. What the hell is going on? Gentoku asked himself. That's when an idea starts to form in his head. Gentoku starts cackling like a maniac, thinking he must have read so many light novels that he was now dreaming about being isekai'd. Soon he comes across a sign for a business called Alexandrite Trading Company, which struck him as a pretty weird name, and that was the exact moment it finally clicked. He realized the letters on the sign weren't Japanese or English, yet somehow he could read them perfectly. Gentoku refused to believe what was happening. Suddenly a voice booms, telling him not to move an inch. He spins around and finds himself staring down a group of guards in full armor, demanding to know who he is. Confused, he wonders who the hell these guys are supposed to be. The armor and swords didn't look like cosplay, they looked like actual real-deal medieval knights. One thing was clear, he was definitely not in Japan. Apparently he really had been transported to another world. The guards demand to know what he's doing there, but he tries to explain that he doesn't have the slightest clue himself. One of them, losing his temper, accuses him of breaking in without permission. As the guard lunges at him, Jintoku's instincts kick in, and with a swift Aikido move, he slams the guy onto the ground, but he regrets it the second he does it. The Aikido his grandfather taught him had manifested at the worst possible time. With no other choice, the other guards surround him. Realizing there was no way he could win a fight against this many opponents, he surrenders on the spot. Jintoku begs them to just listen, but he's cut off by a woman's voice that makes the guards freeze. Her assistant warns her not to get too close. She looks him over, commenting on his weird clothes, black hair, and dark eyes. Her partner then asks if he's a local, and Jintoku confirms that he's definitely not from around there. The woman introduces herself as Sandrone, president of the Alexandrite Trading Company, and asks for his name. A bit hesitant, he introduces himself as Oda Gentoku, and well, Sandrone and her assistant find the name a bit peculiar. She mocks the name, but he immediately shuts her down, saying he thinks it's cool. Then he asks if she's finally going to listen to what he has to say. Sandrone agrees, but with one condition: if his story is boring, he's going straight to jail. Gentoku panics, thinking he's only just gotten to this world and he's already about to be thrown behind bars. But the woman reassures him, saying she's actually pretty curious. She explains that he managed to bypass her security mages and get into the warehouse, only to be caught by the guards outside. While hearing the word security mages confirms for Gentoku that he really is in a fantasy world. Meanwhile, her assistant tries to light a cigarette with some kind of straw, and in his head, Gentoku scoffs at how primitive it is. He wonders why the guy doesn't just use fire magic or something. With that, he walks up to the two of them and says that if they need a light, he can lend them his. With a click, he flicks the lighter, leaving everyone completely stunned. They couldn't believe their eyes, and they start calling the lighter incantless magic. The assistant wonders if it's some kind of magic tool that creates fire. Suddenly, Sandrone snatches the lighter right out of his hand, and then she kicks him. Much to her partner's shock, Sandrone is absolutely mesmerized by the object. Gentoku, still on the floor, explains that it's just a lighter. That's when it dawns on him, the classic isekai cliché, where a modern item blows the minds of everyone in a fantasy world. Sandrone then tells them to take the conversation somewhere else. Gentoku, terrified, asks if she's taking him to jail, but Sandrone just smiles and says he's getting the VIP treatment. She orders her assistant Richter to escort him. Gentoku tries to ask for his lighter back, but he's completely ignored. Richter just tells him to follow along. Gentoku immediately sees the irony, thinking how he went from suspicious guy to VIP guest in a heartbeat. As he walks through the streets of this new world, he realizes that even though the lighter saved his skin, his anxiety was far outweighing any excitement. After all, his encounter with that beautiful merchant was about to turn his single life completely upside down. Once they get to Sandrone's office, she invites him inside. Gentoku asks for his lighter back, saying it was expensive, but Sandrone demands an explanation first. He insists it's just a lighter, a tool for making fire, and that there are no magic tools for it. Sandrone is pretty confused. She says she can't feel any mana in the object, so how on earth could it create fire? She asks if he didn't buy it at a fire shop, but he doesn't have the faintest clue what she's talking about. Seeing how confused he is, she decides it's better to hear his story first. So Gentoku explains everything. He was working in another world, got electrocuted, passed out, and woke up in front of her warehouse. After a moment, she says that for the time being, she'll accept the story that he came from another world. The look on her face leaves Gentoku absolutely terrified. The poor guy has a really bad feeling about all of this, and looking at Richter, he's even more certain of it. That's when Sandrone says Gentoku is interesting, and more importantly, that she smells money coming off him. She says that since he has nowhere else to go, he should belong to her, but our boy refuses immediately. He explains that while he's flattered, he's sworn to live his life single and free. Sandrone corrects him, saying he's got the wrong idea. She doesn't want him, she wants his knowledge. The deal was simple, his world's knowledge in exchange for food, shelter, and information about this new place. With no other choice, he accepts. Sandrone asks how he uses the lighter to make fire so easily. He says he understands the mechanics, but he wonders if fire is really that rare there, since she'd mentioned people buying it from an Okibiya. Sandrone then asks Richter to explain the situation, so the assistant introduces himself again as the secretary and bodyguard to the president of the Alexandrite Trading Company. Gentoku then asks him to explain more about the fire and the country they're in. Seeing that it was going to be a long conversation, Sandrone leaves them alone, saying she's going to take a bath and go to bed, and she takes the lighter with her. With the boss gone, Gentoku comments that Richter's life seems pretty rough, but he denies it and starts the explanation. He says that Okibiya are shops that sell fire conjured by magic. Usually fire can only be created with magic or hard-to-use flints, so every household has a lamp and buys fire on a regular basis. To Gentoku, that was something he'd never see in Japan, he thought about how, in his world, they never had to worry about something as basic as fire. Suddenly Richter starts rambling about the potential of the lighter, saying that if they could mass-produce it, the company would be set for life. Gentoku, however, worries about the Okibiya, but the assistant assures him that Sandrone wouldn't lose any sleep over that. He then asks how old they are, and Richter reveals that Sandrone is 21, and he's 29, which leaves Gentoku jaw-dropped at just how much power she has at such a young age. With the fire thing settled, Gentoku asks about the country he's in. Richter opens up a map and explains they're in the kingdom of Edelstein, the largest nation on the continent, specifically in the 13th district, where the warehouses are located. He says security is handled by magic detection fields, and that the company has its own guard mages. The fact that Gentoku bypassed all of it was why they were so stunned. Richter confirms that monsters and various types of magic exist, leading Gentoku to conclude that this sounds more and more like a fantasy world. With a smile, he wonders if this is his moment to shine, using his knowledge of the modern world. But first things first, he asks the question any working man would: do they have taxes or income tax returns? Richter, however, has no clue what a tax return even is. He explains that taxes are only paid once a year, and are a flat 10% of income. A shock to Gentoku declares the place a paradise. He thinks that while he was single in Japan and had money, in this world he could finally have the perfect quiet life he'd always dreamed of. But Richter warns him it won't be that easy, since he doesn't know anything yet, and Sandrone isn't about to let him walk away anytime soon. Feeling motivated, he asks where he should start, and the assistant suggests something related to the lighter. With a determined smile, he decides that instead of lighters, he'll start with something simpler: matches. He then asks Richter to teach him more about flints and how they make fire around there. But it was getting late, so Richter suggests they pick it up tomorrow, and says he'll have a room prepared for him. So, Gentoku grabs his tool bag, and as he's led to his room, he thinks that at the end of the day, things don't seem so bad. Living alone could be tough, but he believed he could finally have the slow, peaceful life he'd always wanted. That night, however, he was tossing and turning in bed, dying of embarrassment over his grand declaration about swearing to stay a bachelor. On his second day in this world, he wakes up early, and is impressed by the hustle and bustle of the district, noticing there wasn't a single Japanese face in sight. That's when Richter opens the door to his room, wishing him a good morning. The secretary asks our hero if he managed to get a good night's sleep on his first night there. Gentoku replies, more or less, complaining that the mattress was way too hard, which leaves the assistant confused by technical terms he'd never heard before. Wasting no time, Richter invites him to breakfast, mentioning that Sandrone is already waiting for him so they can get to work. As they walk, our boy comments that the place is way too clean for a warehouse, also praising the luxury of the guest room he stayed in. The assistant explains that the building also serves as their office, and that the rooms are specially decorated for the company's high-profile clients. Upon entering the main hall, Gentoku is once again struck by how elegant the atmosphere is. There sat the president, relaxing in her high-end armchair. She greets him with a good morning while puffing on her pipe. Gentoku immediately asks if he can have his lighter back, but the woman cuts him off, telling him to eat first before getting his first assignment. Holding the object, she orders him to create a simplified version that can be mass-produced, and asks if he's actually up to the task. Gentoku says it all depends on the tools, but he quickly panics as he remembers his bag, hoping it's still intact. But to his relief, his clothes, wallet, and items like his solar charger and headphones were still safely tucked inside. While Sandrone mocked the weird stuff he was carrying, Gentoku was just thankful he hadn't lost anything from his own world. That's when he pulls out his phone to check if anything still works. And just as expected, there was no signal at all. Suddenly, Sandrone, staring intently at what he's holding, gets so close she actually startles him. She's mesmerized by the glow of the screen and immediately asks what on earth that mysterious object is. Gentoku explains that it's a smartphone, a communication device, but admits that almost everything on it is useless now without the internet. The president tries to get a closer look, but our protagonist makes it clear she's not getting her hands on it, as it's his only lifeline left. Sandrone is visibly annoyed by his answer, but the tension is quickly broken by a maid announcing that breakfast is served. Faced with a feast that looks like a work of art, Gentoku finally prepares for his first real meal in this world. Once he finishes, Richter asks if the food was to his liking, and Gentoku confirms it was excellent, and strangely, even a little familiar. Sandrone then pulls out one of her fine cigarettes, and finally starts getting down to business with Gentoku, who also decides to have a smoke. Curious, she asks if what he's holding is tobacco, and he confirms it's a brand from his original world. She explains that her company doesn't just deal in magic tool development, they also produce their own luxury tobacco. Interested in something new, she proposes a trade. Gentoku would try her brand Stardust, and she'd try his, and so, the two of them sample each other's products. Gentoku notices a sweet, strange taste, but admits the sensation is surprisingly pleasant and relaxing. The president, however, isn't so lucky, hacking and coughing from the harsh, toxic taste of the modern cigarette. She thinks the taste is horrific and forbids Gentoku from ever smoking it again, ordering him to only smoke her tobacco from now on. Sandrone explains that her smoke is a special blend with medicinal properties, making it the absolute favorite among noble ladies. Gentoku mentions that in his world, cigarettes are considered extremely bad for your health, which leaves the woman's jaw on the floor. She immediately gets furious, claiming her product is a purifying herb, leading our boy to conclude he'll have to change his habits while living there. The conversation ends when Sandrone stands up, mentioning that she and Richter have a business meeting scheduled. She reminds him to start working on the simplified lighter in the workshop, but Jintoku tries to stop her. He complains that he doesn't know anything about the place, so Sandrone orders Richter to call in a girl we haven't met yet to be his walking encyclopedia. As she leaves, the president warns him the meeting will take a while and that she'll be away for a few days. The poor guy is instantly in shock at the thought of being left behind for so long in a place he barely knows. Richter then explains that Gentoku will have a support assistant to answer all his questions. But that doesn't seem to make the poor guy feel any better. Once they're in the lab, Richter explains that the assistant is one of the company's engineers. While Gentoku checks out the era's strange tools, that's when a blonde girl bursts into the room, shouting and asking what the hell he did to impress Lady Sandrone. Gentoku is left completely clueless. The girl glares at him, annoyed that he's the visitor from another world who managed to get her boss's attention, something she thought was her exclusive territory. She introduces herself as Yellen, a magic tool developer, and asks for his age, doubting he's actually capable of being her support, and so Gentoku introduces himself. Yellen brags about being 18 and a 3-attribute prodigy, the best engineer Sandrone has ever recognized. Gentoku, however, doesn't have the slightest idea what those terms even mean. Yellen then remembers Sandrone's instructions to treat him like a lost child and be gentle. With a mocking smile, she takes on a big sister tone, saying she's going to teach the helpless little baby everything he needs to know. The provocation clearly gets under Gentoku's skin. That's when he remembers Richter's smile and it all clicks. In his head, he curses Sandrone for the trick she played on him. Trying to be diplomatic, he says he's looking forward to her help. And just like that, the partnership between the bachelor and the genius inventor was about to begin. But before they can even start, a fundamental question pops into Jiang-toku's mind. What exactly is a magic tool? The question leaves Yellen completely floored. Like, seriously floored. She quickly realizes that he really truly knows absolutely nothing. She apologizes and sits down, explaining that he needs to understand the basics before they can even get to work. And so the morning was spent with Gentoku bombarding Yellen with questions, and despite the initial confusion, he actually learned quite a bit. The first lesson was about mana, the fantasy energy that everyone in this world is born with. This energy is divided into 6 elements, but elemental wielders are rare, as most people only possess colorless mana. Even so, basic magic is taught in schools, allowing even regular people to use simple household spells. But those born with elemental affinity are on a whole other level, becoming mages or engineers, while those with 3 elements can even serve the royal court. Yellen then brags about being a 3-attribute wielder: water, earth, and wind, and Gentoku admits that's actually pretty impressive. He asks if she can use every kind of spell, but Yellen explains she only masters basic and creation magic. She's not a combat mage. Yellen starts hyping up Sandrone, but Gentoku immediately starts making fun of her for being way too bossy. This infuriates Yellen, who snaps back that she only joined the company because of her boss's sheer genius. Changing the subject, Yellen decides she's going to check Gentoku's magical affinity. She pulls out a sheet of paper, explaining that it's a magic affinity diagnostic sheet developed by the Alexandrite company itself. Yellen proudly mentions how, in the past, only mages from the association could perform the test. But now, a single drop of blood reveals everything: element and mana level. Our boy is impressed but asks if that didn't put the association mages out of a job. She confirms they hated it. The big shots from the association even stormed the place, screaming at Sandrone, but she didn't blink an eye. To prove who was right, she took the invention to the royal palace and challenged the association mages, crushing them completely. The magic association had to admit defeat, and today those sheets are indispensable. Now it was time for the test. Gentoku admits he's not a big fan of blood, but Yellen reassures him and takes his hand. She explains there's a hidden needle and it's just a little prick. As soon as he presses his finger down, the paper starts to glow. Well, the result leaves her jaw on the floor. He had all of them, all 6 attributes, and his mana level was through the roof. Our hero, feeling pumped, jokes about how super talented he is and asks her to drop some compliments. But Yellen immediately kills the mood, telling him it's no time for jokes. Suddenly, she points to the paper, asking what the hell that was. Gentoku, confused, asks if there was still more to it. On the paper there weren't 6 lines, but 7. Yellen tells Gentoku to shut up, because she doesn't get it either. After all, only 6 attributes even exist. Usually the elements are color-coded, but the 7th line was purple. Gentoku wonders what that represents, and Yellen says she's going to find out. She asks for his hand again to take a closer look, and then Yellen begins to channel her mana into him, telling him to raise his hand and close his eyes. With his eyes closed, Gentoku couldn't help but notice how warm her hand had become. Yellen instructed him to slowly visualize that mana turning a deep shade of purple. That's when a bolt of purple light crackled from their hands. Surprised, Gentoku recognized the phenomenon instantly. Lightning. Yellen stood there in disbelief, realizing he could actually convert mana into electricity. Our hero, a bit dazed, speculated that it might be a side effect of the massive shock that killed him in the first place. She explained that he didn't just possess every single attribute, he had awakened a completely new one. Gentoku thought it was pretty cool, even if it was technically the cause of his death. Yellen warned him that if word got out, every nation and guild on the map would be hunting him down, but Gentoku brushed the idea off immediately. He made it clear he wasn't interested in being some kind of high-profile target. The girl was shocked, asking if he'd really turn down what would essentially be a guaranteed massive promotion. With a smirk he replied that he had other things he'd much rather be doing. Yellen called him ridiculous, admitting she felt embarrassed now for bragging about her 3 attributes, while Gentoku noted that being promoted was only good if it led to more freedom. With that settled, he decided it was finally time to get down to business. The girl, seeing his spark, commented that his motivation was a good sign. Gentoku admitted that while most people would be desperate to find a way home, he was actually finding this world pretty fun, and since he could use magic he wanted to master it. He asked Yellen to teach him the ropes of magic, knowing he'd need a solid foundation for his other ideas, starting with a tool to make fire. With that, he started calling her sensei. The girl turned beet red at the title but accepted it with a smile, promising to teach him everything she knew. And with a handshake, the partnership was official. Gentoku soon realized that developing magic tools wasn't all that different from his old job, and he knew his grandfather would have absolutely loved it. To Gentoku, the idea of being a magic handyman sounded like a blast. Excited, he prepared to develop an invention that would change the world, a revolutionary way to create fire. He turned to his new teacher and asked his very first question. Gentoku questioned why they didn't just use magic to start fires, since he already had the attribute. Yellen, however, told him it wasn't that simple. She explained that to manifest something like fire, you either needed to recite a complex incantation, or send simple commands into magic stones. Yellen explained that magic stones are crystals harvested from beasts. Adventurers hunt them down and sell them to the trading guild, which then distributes them to companies like theirs. She then picked up an object to demonstrate that, revealing that the whole reason they buy these stones is to power magic tools. Yellen confirmed that the tool had a processed magic stone inside, and as she channeled her mana, the water inside the container began to boil. He was impressed watching the water bubble up so quickly. Yellen then explained that a magic tool engineer doesn't just design the object, they also inscribe commands onto the stones, like produce heat. Gentoku finally understood what magic tool engineers actually were. They were artisans who inscribed commands onto stones and built the devices that utilized them. He thought it was incredible, and the urge to start creating took over. Yellen continued her explanation, saying that stones have different purity grades. The purest ones cost a fortune and allow for complex commands, while low-purity ones break easily. Gentoku concluded that the stones were basically consumables, making adventurers as the suppliers essential to the economy. He finally grasped the economic cycle of this world. Adventurers kill beasts, merchants buy the stones, and they sell magic tools powered by them. Curious, Gentoku asked to see the stone from the kettle. As he picked it up, he found himself staring at a strangely familiar symbol. He was in total shock seeing the inscription. Yellen was surprised he could read it, explaining it was a simple arcane character for heat that she had carved herself. Yellen said the stones produce effects that match whatever character is engraved on them. She then showed him the affinity test sheet, mentioning it was written by Sandrone herself. Yellen bragged about being able to write 3 characters, while Sandrone could do 8. Gentoku, stunned, confirmed it was literally the same kanji he knew from back home. Without thinking, he asked if arcane characters were easy to write. That question sent her into an absolute rage. She exploded, screaming that it takes years of testing, sometimes an entire lifetime, to develop a single functional character, which left him terrified. But deep down, Gentoku felt like he'd hit the jackpot. The core of magic engineering in this world was basically just kanji he already knew. This could be an even bigger cheat than his attributes, or his mana levels. Once she calmed down, Yellen said she'd eventually teach him how to write, but he quickly said he thought he could handle the writing part, which only annoyed her more with his perceived arrogance. In his mind, Gentoku was already dreaming of the possibilities, thinking he could build tools like they were puzzles. This was going to be fun. He snapped back to reality and told her he was going to create an igniter. Yellen immediately asked if he meant that lighter thing, but he explained that lighters would take too much time to develop. It was better to start with matches. He described them as a much improved version of the flint they currently used. Yellen was mesmerized by the idea of something that could catch fire with a single strike. Gentoku added that if it worked, they could mass-produce them at a very low price. The girl was floored by the idea of mass-producing fire. This wasn't just a tool, it was a revolution. With his spirit fired up, our boy prepared for his first real job in another world, but the manufacturing of matches was about to hit a major snag. Days later, he looked completely burnt out. That's when Richter found him, asking if he was doing all right. He admitted he wasn't doing well at all, and that making matches was way harder than he had imagined. It all started when he treated the arcane characters like a shortcut, sloppily carving fire and injecting mana. The result was a massive explosion of flames. He managed to put out the fire, but Yellen knocked him out for being so reckless. The truth was, carving kanji into magic stones worked, but there was a catch: power control, ignition ease. Every time he fixed one problem, another one popped up. He had hit a wall, learning the hard way that he'd need a lot more skill to turn his idea into an actual product. He felt like a complete idiot for being so naive. Gentoku thought he'd just steamroll everything with his modern knowledge, but reality was a harsh teacher. Richter tried to cheer him up, saying that what he was trying to do could change the very foundations of the world, so of course it wouldn't be easy. The poor guy was actually moved by the support, so Richter suggested a break for a drink that night, and Gentoku accepted on the spot. Once they were at a tavern, Gentoku tucked into a stew. He was surprised by how incredible the food tasted. He commented that while the food and drinks in his world were good, this place definitely held its own. The secretary explained that this area was a massive culinary district, packed with amazing spots to explore. Gentoku got excited about the idea of a bar crawl, and Richter offered to recommend the best spots in town. As he drank, Gentoku mentioned how much he loved visiting bars and finding ways to unwind. He reminisced about how he lived back in his world, running his own shop and spending his time off eating well and traveling. His biggest wish was to keep that same lifestyle here. He just wanted his usual freedom, living one day at a time. Richter suggested he forget about work for a while, but Gentoku confessed he was pushing himself so hard because the matches were just the first step. Suddenly he noticed a couple nearby repairing a cracked wall. Curious, he asked if that was a wall repair, and Richter confirmed it was. Gentoku looked at the bucket and realized the material wasn't mortar or cement. He wondered what kind of strange mixture it was. That's when Richter explained they use slime from magic monsters for the job. He detailed that once boiled, the slime becomes a goo that hardens as it cools, making it useful for everything from repairs to construction. Richter said the material was popular because it was cheap and easy to handle, leading Gentoku to realize that even monsters had their uses. The secretary mentioned you could even mix in dye for color, or crushed stone for heavy-duty building. In an instant, Gentoku's entire expression changed. He jumped to his feet, thanked Richter, and sprinted off, saying he had something to test. If this worked, the game was about to change. Shortly after, Gentoku made it back to the lab, convinced he could finally make the matches a reality. A few days later, Sandrone returned from her trip and headed straight to the office to check on progress. When she found Gentoku, she was horrified by his disheveled look and ordered him to clean himself up and shave immediately. Sandrone complained that the old igniter was getting hard to use, but Gentoku told her it was just low on fuel and that everything was under control. With a confident grin, he presented a small box, saying he'd created a brand new fire starter. He explained it was called a magic stone match, or simply a match, and asked her to watch the demo. With a single strike, a flame flared up at the tip of the stick, leaving Sandrone completely speechless. Gentoku explained that the way it worked wasn't as complicated as it looked. He detailed how he used a low-level stone with the flame character, but since the heat was too intense, he crushed it into a powder to dial back the power. The secret was mixing that powder with slime to form the match head, adjusting the ratio perfectly to control the burn. The result was a functional, safe, and extremely practical stick. With that, he asked her if it wasn't a million times easier to use than flint. Sandrone analyzed the item and quickly concluded that the cost was low, and that, with the right equipment, mass production would be a landslide success. Even Yellen, despite a bit of jealousy, had to admit that Gentoku was truly talented at what he did. So the president offered him a house and money as a reward, but our protagonist said he had a different proposal. Wanting to learn how the business world worked in this place, he asked to stay with her for 1 year in exchange for his knowledge. Sandrone realized right then that he intended to go independent and start his own company, and yep, his plan was to focus solely on tool development while leaving the marketing and sales to her company. She questioned what was in it for her, preferring to keep him as an employee, but he made it clear he wasn't interested in living on anyone's leash. Hearing that made Sandrone remember her own bitter past, back when her father would scream that her only duty was to marry and provide an heir. In her memory, her father demanded she pay back the family's investment with her own body. Back then, Sandrone felt like she had no choices. Her studies and even her future marriage were just to satisfy her family. Trapped in a golden cage, she promised herself that one day she'd run away from it all and finally be the master of her own fate. Back in the present, she concluded that the man in front of her just wanted to live free, exactly like she had once dreamed. Gentoku explained that his plan was to work hard, but also have time for his hobbies, and to create whatever magic tools he wanted. He stated that to truly create, he needed to follow his own rules. The bachelor admitted he owed her a lot, but made it clear that this was his way of life, and he didn't plan on changing for anyone. Gentoku said that even in this new world, he was going to live free, and have as much fun as possible. So, Sandrone decided to accept his request, guaranteeing his freedom, which left Yalan Yalan completely floored by such a display of kindness, a side of Sandrone she'd never seen. Sandrone already predicted that in a year, matches would be everywhere and the profits would be insane. Since fire is a daily necessity, our hero started thinking about the exciting future of leading his own company and changing the world with his inventions. But Sandrone teased him, saying it was a shame he didn't ask for her as his reward, as she would have given herself to him completely. Without hesitating for even a second, Jantoku shot back that he had zero interest in that sort of thing. Yalan freaked out at his audacity, but Jantoku doubled down, saying he didn't plan on ever getting married and that the single life suited him best. To everyone's surprise, Sandrone burst out laughing and revealed that she hated the idea of marriage too. Jantoku smiled, knowing they were on the same page. Holding out her hand, the president said the two of them might just get along great from here on out. Meanwhile, Jantoku realized she wasn't just some arrogant queen. She was actually cool and fun to be around. However, the training started immediately. Sandrone slammed a heavy pile of books onto the table to teach him everything about business. She ordered him to read them all by the next day, making him take back what he'd thought. She definitely was a terrifying queen. So Jantoku dived into his studies to earn his independence, pulling all-nighters to understand how the market worked. It was an intense year of non-stop work and learning, where he and Yalan became an unbeatable team in the lab, until finally the big day arrived. He opened his very own shop, Oda Magic Tool Development, inspired by his old business in Japan, but the road there wasn't easy. A year earlier, the announcement of the matches had caused a total uproar among the old fire shop owners. As expected, Sandrone and Jantoku had to face a storm of criticism from merchants who feared they'd go bankrupt because of the new invention. Even amidst the chaos, she kept her cool, with Richter and little Yalan by her side for support. In the end, his persistence paid off. Jantoku was finally ready to start his life as a single entrepreneur, free and full of plans. On that tense meeting day, Sandrone told the shopkeepers that they'd already tested the product and knew exactly how practical it was. She emphasized that customer convenience was what truly drove a successful business. She was ruthless, telling them that if they were against it, they were only thinking of themselves and not the well-being of the consumers. But she quickly softened her tone, explaining she didn't want to destroy them. She wanted to turn them into official sellers for the new matches. The plan was ambitious: turn the old shops into subcontractors, ensuring everyone's profits increased through the company's marketing. However, an old shopkeeper exploded in anger, saying his shop was the oldest in the capital and he wouldn't throw away generations of history. Watching this, Jantoku started to worry as the mood only grew more hostile. He noticed that young Sandrone didn't quite understand the emotional weight a shop sign carried for these people. In a world where fire was scarce, those shops had supported people's lives for decades, becoming their owners' pride and joy. To Jantoku, demanding they change their name and business model so abruptly felt a bit too harsh. The old man kept shouting, saying he'd protected that name since before Sandrone was born, and wouldn't listen to senseless suggestions. That sips when the man Sip's son called out to him. He argued that even if they weren't a traditional fire shop anymore, they could still keep the business alive by selling matches. The son explained that he barely possessed the fire attribute, and could never run the family business the traditional way his father did. In that world, the gift of fire was rare, and didn't always pass from father to son, forcing many historic shops to close for lack of a successor. Jantoku then asked if the shop was really that important to him, and the young man confirmed that the family legacy meant everything. The old man poured his heart out, saying he loved that place, and the fact that they'd helped people for so long, and his biggest fear was seeing it all end with him. The young shopkeeper stated his biggest wish was to keep the shop alive, even if they had to change what they sold to survive. Jantoku then opened up, sharing that he had also decided to follow in his family's footsteps and take over the work his parents and grandparents did before him. He admitted he'd changed the way he worked a bit, but insisted the essence and core purpose remained exactly the same. Just like his ancestors, his goal was always to do work that supported and improved the daily lives of ordinary people. Looking at the old man, our hero said that, deep down, his son just wanted to protect what his father loved most, the legacy of serving the community. Moved, the father finally gave in and gave his blessing, telling his son to do whatever he thought was best, since he was the next owner. The atmosphere shifted instantly. With the approval of the capital's oldest shop, the other merchants began to accept that matches were the future. Suddenly the room turned into a chaotic scramble, with everyone shouting that they wanted to sell matches too. Later in the carriage, Sandrone celebrated that everything ended peacefully, and thanked Jantoku, admitting his little nudge was key to the success. She quickly looked over the various signed contracts, feeling incredibly proud of achieving such massive results in such a short time. The president told Richter that from here on out, she needed to focus entirely on the growth of the Alexandrite company. That's when she dropped a bombshell. The next step was establishing a delivery schedule for the matches to the royal family itself. The plan was to take the results and the new products to pay proper respects to the House of Edelstein and seal the deal for good. Sandrone was on fire, determined to secure that royal connection at any cost. And just as she predicted, the matches became an absolute hit, spreading through the city and changing everyone's daily routine. They became an essential item for households and adventurers alike, and with royal approval, match sales became the main pillar of the Alexandrite company. While working hard, Gentoku organized all his ideas in a small notebook, studying magic engineering like there was no tomorrow. He spent the year racking up money and knowledge, all focused on one goal, enjoying his single life in this new world. And finally the big day arrived. 1 year later, the sign for his new shop was ready, shining at the top of the building. Gentoku watched the final installation, and when asked if everything looked okay, he confirmed the structure was perfect. He looked at the sign with pride, feeling like he finally had a real business. Not bad for a newcomer. That's when Sandrone and Richter showed up to celebrate with him. The secretary immediately congratulated him on the grand opening of his workshop. Gentoku joked if they only came to congratulate him, but Richter revealed they'd brought a gift, a fine bottle of wine. Thanking them, Gentoku said there was no point chatting at the door and invited them both into his new home. The inside of the workshop was still empty, but it already smelled like a fresh start, and the many inventions yet to come. Sandrone praised the place, and Gentoku explained he'd bought the property ready to go, with everything he needed to live. Seeing some blueprints, she asked if he was already heading back to work. Gentoku said he was going to try making a coffee maker, but looking at the sketch, Sandrone could only see a water purifier. He explained that the coffee in this world was bitter, just the way he liked it, but Sandrone disagreed, saying tea was much better. That's when Gentoku said that anyone who can't appreciate a good cup of coffee is still just a child. Sandrone was indignant, commenting that he must be the only man in the world brave enough to call her a child to her face. Changing the subject, she asked if having his own shop helped with ideas. He confirmed it did, showing her the notebook where he'd been jotting everything down since the start. She then asked if he'd take commissions from her, but Gentoku said it would depend on his mood, as he didn't want to get famous and lose his days off. He stated that if he created something fun to play with, he'd let her know, because he had a ton of things he still wanted to test out on his own. She noticed he was way more excited than when he was just an employee, and Gentoku agreed, saying that working for yourself is paradise. Sandrone joked that after a year of working together, she thought he'd at least propose, but Gentoku reminded her he wasn't looking to belong to anyone. She admitted he never wavered in his convictions. That's when the president asked a deep question, wondering if they'd still get along when they were just two old people in the future. With a smile, Gentoku guaranteed they would, but made sure to emphasize it would be as good business partners. With that, Sandrone stretched, saying the visit helped relieve some stress, and mentioned she was heading back to her duties. Curious, Gentoku asked Richter what that was all about. The secretary commented that while the company was growing fast, the weight on his boss's shoulders was only getting heavier. He confessed that seeing Gentoku helped Sandrone relax, serving as an escape valve for all the pressure she faces. Richter warned that they'd be needing his help soon, and Gentoku told the secretary to tell her she doesn't have to carry the world by herself. Finally alone, our hero felt proud of finally securing his own castle and his freedom, but his restless mind was already starting to work on a new magic device. The bachelor's next goal was something essential for surviving the climate, mastering the power of ice. This world also had 4 distinct seasons, and the temperatures weren't that different from Japan, which made life pretty comfortable. However, with summer approaching, Gentoku felt an urgency growing inside him, a desperate craving for a bone-chillingly cold beer. The wine he'd received was high quality, but in the sweltering heat, nothing beat the desire for a refreshing drink to quench his thirst. He dreamed of that divine feeling of throwing back a cold one, after spending all day sweating and working hard under the hot sun. Motivated by his own desire, our boy declared he had to build that thing no matter what. He then grabbed a box full of goblin magic stones and started carving the kanji that would provide the necessary effects. Gentoku marveled at how easy it was to create functions just by etching symbols. Next he looked over a large wooden chest and his sketches, focused on building what would be the very first refrigerator in that world. He tried to base the design on a water-cooled fridge, but the schematic seemed way more complicated than he'd imagined. The way it was going, only the magic stone stayed cold, while the inside of the chest barely dropped in temperature. Because of that, Gentoku realized he needed to make the box more airtight to keep the cold inside, but he felt something was still missing. That's when he remembered how versatile slimes were, thinking that in moments like this they really shine. Without wasting any time, he started applying the goo to the edges of the wood, cooling it down immediately so it would harden into the perfect fit. And there it was, he created a perfect gasket. With the right idea, the uses for those creatures really were infinite. With the eye of a seasoned repairman, the slime felt just as broken as the arcane characters. It was incredibly practical, but he didn't stop there. He decided to test out various types of magic stones to see which one would provide the best performance. Finally, the prototype was complete, a wooden refrigerator with a built-in ice maker. The cold air kanji was enough for the fridge section, but the freezer part would only produce a thin layer of ice before the stone shattered from mana overload. He concluded that he needed more durability and more power. To solve this, our hero decided it was time to seek some outside help. As he walked through the city, he ran into the old fire shop owner, who greeted him with a massive smile and tons of energy. The veteran told him that sales were booming, and the work had become much easier since they no longer had to babysit the flames all day. day. Thanks to the extra time off, he even hired an attendant and took his family on an unforgettable trip to a neighboring country. The old man was glowing, happy to be able to drink with his son and eat well, thanking Jintoku profusely for saving their business. Hearing that warmed Jintoku's heart, he was glad to see his invention had brought so much prosperity to others. The shopkeeper mentioned that the atmosphere in the city had changed so much that even many single guys finally found the time to get married. But when the old man started suggesting that he get married too, Jintoku bailed immediately, asking them to keep supporting the shop. After a long walk, he finally reached the Adventurers Guild and found Hexen, who was surprised to see our boy looking so exhausted and out of breath. Hexen asked if he was there on Sandrone's orders, but Jintoku cut to the chase and asked if they had any magic stones available. Handing over his business card, he explained to Hexen that he was now independent and running his own shop. Hexen commented that the Alexandrite company had blown up over the last year and figured Jintoku's salary must have been incredible, but he replied that he preferred the solo quiet life, as that's usually when his best ideas strike. Curious, the big guy asked what kind of idea he was working on. Jintoku revealed the plan, a magic device to keep drinks ice cold. Hexen admitted that was the dream, as every summer he thought about how great it would be to have something as refreshing as mountain water. With a smirk, Jintoku said that if the glass is chilled too, it's even better. Hexen asked for a round on the house once it was finished, and asked what level of stone he needed. Well, our boy wanted something above wolf level. In that world, magic stones were ranked on a star system to define their power and quality. The scale went from 1 to 10. Goblins were level 1, wolves were level 2, and at the top were dragons, the absolute peak of fantasy. Hexen checked the stock and said he had level 5, but Jintoku believed a level 3 would be perfect for his project. That's when 3 female adventurers entered the guild, a nun, a young girl with pigtails, and a girl with short hair. Looking like a very experienced team, they introduced themselves as Blanche, Rosso, and A. Rosso announced they had brought in 20 Delicondors, and the creatures were already being prepped for processing. She mentioned that Delicondor stones are exactly level 3, which got Jintoku excited about the jackpot he just found. Curious, the girl asked if he was an engineer and what he was building, since level 3 allows for some pretty high-end stuff, but she was instantly floored when she heard he intended to create a device capable of making ice. Jintoku explained he was just one step away from finishing. Blanche praised his skill and asked if should they place an order, he would build one for their group as well. A bit awkwardly, Jintoku said he'd only just opened the shop and wasn't taking commissions quite yet. The girls got fired up and asked for his workshop's address so they could visit, and thinking it wouldn't be a problem, he ended up agreeing. So Jintoku gave the girls his shop's address. They said their goodbyes, all excited and eager to see his inventions up close. Hexen quickly warned him that they were S-rank adventurers, making our hero realize his future clients were some pretty big names. Back at his workshop, as the sun began to set, the bachelor prepared for a long night of work. With the level 3 stones in hand, he could hardly contain his excitement about finally finishing his refrigerator and having a cold drink. Meanwhile, in her office, Sandrone analyzed some documents. Her merchant's intuition told her that something very lucrative was about to emerge. And so, the journey of Jintoku and his new refrigerator entered a new chapter. Inside the workshop, the first ice cubes were finally ready. Testing their firmness, he confirmed the project was a total success. But Jintoku knew that being a magic engineer wasn't just about building cool stuff. First, he needed to draft the spec sheet for the prototype, a process that was second nature from his old life in Japan. But what really changed here was the need to register the magic script used in the device. The characters he developed were his intellectual property, and without that registration, anyone could steal his idea. The Merchants Guild was strict. Using a registered magic script without permission meant heavy fines and even a ban from trading. Reviewing the forms, he ensured the structure of the ice maker and the arcane commands were all described correctly. With everything ready, he grabbed his bag and prepared to take the paperwork to the commercial guild for final verification. The plan was simple: register everything and then rush over to the Alexandrite company to sell the prototype to Sandrone. But as he opened the door, he jumped out of his skin when he ran right into the president and her loyal secretary Richter. While our boy tried to catch his breath, Sandrone said she was just in the neighborhood and decided to drop by. But he soon grinned, commenting that the duo's visit couldn't have happened at a more perfect time. Once inside the workshop, Jintoku prepared to show his business partners his latest and most revolutionary invention. Jintoku realized he hadn't bought any tea for his guests, and, a bit embarrassed, asked if water was okay. He served them both, but the sound of the ice clinking against the mug made Sandrone and Richter freeze in their tracks. With eyes wide, the president asked if that was actually ice. Sandrone could hardly believe she was seeing ice in the middle of summer. Richter also lost his cool, shouting that it was the real deal. Leaning forward like a hungry predator, she demanded to know how he'd pulled it off, while the poor guy tried to show her the spec sheet. Nearly devoured by her excitement, Jintoku huddled on the floor after being pushed aside. Impressed, Sandrone wondered what goes on in his head to invent something so revolutionary and useful. He explained that with summer right around the corner, the demand for cold things was going to be massive across the entire city. The merchant immediately saw the potential, imagining restaurants serving ice-cold drinks and dishes to their customers. Reviewing the papers, she noticed he used a Delicondor stone, a level 3 option that was much more affordable for a prototype. Jintoku suggested using level 4 stones to ensure commercial durability, leaving the fine-tuning to the talented Yellen. But Sandrone reminded him that level 4 stones were incredibly expensive, which would prevent most ordinary people from buying the device. That's when our boy dropped his masterstroke. Instead of selling it, why not implement a rental system? He explained that in his original world, renting cars or expensive items was extremely common and profitable. The idea was to charge a low fee for use and have the company handle repairs, charging an extra fee only if something broke. After all, an ice maker is perfect for the heat, but almost nobody would need it during the winter. Renting only when necessary would be much more convenient for the customer, lowering the barrier to entry for the product. Sandrone was instantly mesmerized by the strategy, realizing that rentals could be applied to various other luxury magic tools as well. Sandrone agreed that the high price tags scared off buyers, but with this new rental system, usage would skyrocket across the kingdom. Wasting no time, she called her loyal assistant Richter to put the plan into action immediately. She ordered him to confirm the registration of the magic characters first thing in the morning and handle all the necessary red tape. Jintoku then told them they could take the prototype, pointing to the wooden chest he'd worked so hard to create. As Richter lugged the heavy box out, Sandrone mentioned that Yellen would lead the engineers to analyze every technical detail of the invention, but the business didn't stop there. The president guaranteed he'd receive a generous fee just for the idea of the magic tool. On top of that, Jintoku would earn from the creation of the rental system, and of course receive royalties on every unit produced. Jintoku was beaming at the news, thanking her for the lucrative partnership they just sealed, and of course, Sandrone was just as happy about it. After all, she was about to make a mountain of money. She started to walk away, commenting that he really was impressive, and always came up with things she could never imagine on her own. Suddenly the president stepped closer to Jintoku, revealing that her plans to turn in early that night had just changed. In a swift, bold move, she pulled the poor guy by his tie, bringing their faces just millimeters apart. Sandrone whispered that because of him, she was too fired up to simply close her eyes and sleep. Right after that, she turned and called for Richter to leave, leaving the poor man completely stunned. The poor guy collapsed onto the floor, huffing, feeling like he'd almost been eaten alive by that woman. Deep down, it seems these two bachelors are two halves of a whole that's about to change the world with their business. With the refrigerator ready for market and Yellen making the final tweaks, gold coins were already starting to glimmer on Jintoku's horizon. After finishing his shift, he ran into a guard on his way out to dinner. Jintoku mentioned he was really craving fish, but admitted he hadn't found a truly good spot around there yet. The friendly guard immediately suggested Manhwa's Tavern on 3rd Street in the city's culinary district. She guaranteed their grilled and dried fish were sensational, and Jintoku was already salivating just imagining the feast. The woman got excited and also recommended Rippard's Refectory, but quickly apologized for rambling. She lamented having to stay on the night shift, and the handyman agreed it was a shame she couldn't enjoy the dinner. That's when Jintoku started staring at her torch, and a quick idea flashed through his crazy mind. He commented that it must be tough working only by torchlight, and she confirmed that magic light tools were way too expensive for regular folks. He realized his matches made starting a fire easy, but carrying a torch all night was still a massive pain for the guards. So, the bachelor asked her to wait just a second, saying he was going to grab something from the workshop. A little later, he came back and handed her a sort of cap with a small lantern attached to it. Our boy explained that you just hit the switch and inject a tiny bit of mana for the light magic to finally happen. Suddenly, a powerful beam of light illuminated everything in front of them, and the woman was amazed by how practical that little switch was. Jintoku showed her it was simple, a goblin stone with a light character inside a tube, creating a handmade headlamp. The glow was steady and focused, far superior to any common torch flame. The guard immediately realized this put the old torches to shame, being infinitely easier to use and carry during her entire patrol. Jintoku suggested she use the prototype that night and let him know what she thought, as he was thinking of turning it into a real product soon. The poor woman could hardly believe she'd received something so great, but he brushed it off, saying it was just a project done on a whim with no guarantee. So he said goodbye, telling her to take the gift as a thank you for the food tips, and finally headed off for his fish. As he walked, Jintoku thought about how incredible the engineering profession was, allowing him to change people's lives with simple ideas. A little later, he finally reached the tavern and was met with the perfect grilled fish. Savoring every bite, our bachelor concluded that this simple, delicious life was exactly what he'd always been looking for. The next day, there he was, opening up his workshop, ready for another day's work. Still a bit groggy, he yawned while wondering what the next project to occupy his mind would be, but the silence didn't last long, as Sandrone kicked the door open, nearly making the poor guy jump out of his skin. Furious, the president appeared alongside the guard and warned him to never act on his own again without consulting her. Our boy was completely lost. Sandrone then showed him the lantern, demanding to know if he was the one who built it and just handed out that magic tool without warning. She continued the lecture saying he can't just go throwing inventions into the world like that. The blonde demanded that from now on, any new project or distribution had to go through her approval first. Ignoring his boss Sepsa's fury for a moment, he turned to the guard and asked what she thought of the light tool in practice. The woman beamed, saying it was wonderful, and that the light followed her gaze perfectly, making every detail of her night patrol easier. She confessed the patrol was much smoother, and the two of them started laughing, while Sandrone began huffing like a bull. Ignoring the president, they started discussing the weak points, like the stone that cracked near dawn. So, Jenoku promised to adjust the design and offered the new version to the woman for free, asking only for more technical feedback in return. Full of gratitude, the guard said her goodbyes and left, happy as can be to have helped test such a useful invention. But the peace was short-lived, as Sandrone exploded again, asking if he'd even heard what she said about consulting her first. That's when Jintoku's expression changed. He leaned in close to her face and said he had something very important to tell her. He said he truly appreciated everything she'd done, helping him with work and giving him a place to stay, confessing that he felt he owed her. Sandrone, still irritated, asked what the hell this gratitude talk had to do with him going behind her back. The bachelor explained that the matches in the fridge weren't just to settle the bill, reinforcing that he wanted to be free and independent, which is why he opened his own business. He said he'd learned how ideas become businesses, and that seeing the guard struggling with the torch, he simply acted on impulse to help. Jintoku declared that they should be equals, and that doing everything her way was nowhere near a relationship of equality. To his surprise, Sandrone lowered her guard and admitted he was right, confessing she was being selfish by trying to control him. The president thanked him for his understanding, while Jintoku also apologized, admitting he might have been a bit too harsh with his words. She commented that he's the only man capable of talking to her like that, completely unintimidated by her position or her temper. Sandrone said that most men just bow their heads and do whatever she asks. She confessed she wanted to monopolize his talent because he's someone who doesn't care about the fact that she's a woman and just works well by her side. With that, the atmosphere between them finally returned to normal. Sandrone stated that a balanced partnership is a wonderful thing, making it clear she valued the relationship they'd built. She said her goodbyes, apologizing for the intrusion and mentioning she was heading out. Richter then bowed, offering a sincere apology for all the trouble his boss had caused. While the secretary lamented not being able to stop her in time to avoid the mess, our protagonist told him not to worry about it. Jintoku commented that he'd heard she was going through a rough patch and admitted he'd also been a bit intense in their conversation. Richter revealed that she'd said if it weren't for Jintoku, she would have killed him already, making the poor guy break into a cold sweat at the danger he'd just escaped. Since he was there, Jintoku asked Richter to take the prototypes and the schematics for the new magic lamp back to the company to begin analysis. The secretary asked if he also wanted him to handle the magic script registration, but our hero decided he'd do that himself, taking advantage of his free time that day. With everything settled, Richter left with the blueprints, while Jintoku waved goodbye. Walking through the streets, Jintoku reflected that no matter how much he tried to be independent, he felt he'd never be able to fully repay his debt to Sandrone. He didn't forget that when he was suddenly thrown into this other world with nothing, she was the one who truly saved his life and gave him a direction. Our boy was determined to protect his calm, peaceful life with everything he had, but he knew that meant he had to keep evolving as an engineer. Staring at a light stone, he decided to pay her back by creating even more incredible inventions.